Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is episode 24 of the KMG Show. You know, it's 54 degrees here in Victoria. Spring has finally arrived. There is not a cloud in the sky, but everyone is in a state of panic. I was reminded of the phrase in the painting by Nicolas Poussin, Et In Arcadia Ego, which is a Latin tag, and it means even in Arcadia or paradise, I am here, the I referring to death. I've talked on previous live streams about my hypothesis that the climate extinction meme came about essentially because of the end of the Cold War. That in the 1980s, a great many people were terrified about the prospect of nuclear winter. And then Reagan decided to negotiate with Gorbachev, to the horror, the screaming horror of the neoconservatives who suggested that Reagan was a traitor. And so the Soviet Union itself was folded up in 1991, and then it's like, bam. Oh, the seas are going to start boiling, the Earth is going to terraform into Venus, and we're all going to die. Well, it would seem that that disaster meme, it took too long. We weren't going to get to the fireworks factory fast enough. So now we have the Wu flu, coronavirus, COVID-19, whatever you want to call it. And it seems to be a kind of a mass change in consciousness that a great many people are accepting for the first time, or understanding rather for the first time, that they are actually going to die. No one here gets out alive, as Jim Morrison sang. And this has resulted in absolute panic. Let's look at the financials first. The Dow Jones lost 913 points, or 4.6%. It is now just over 19,000. Oddly, the VIX, or Frady Cat Index, is down almost 6 points, or 8.3%. Corona's live updates, U.S. cases total over 17,000. Mike Pence staffer tests positive. Food supply chains are so far holding up during coronavirus outbreak. The CEO says. Gary Cohn says the U.S. is in a recession that will cost trillions to solve. What else do we have? Goldman Sachs, trusted authority, sees unprecedented stop in economic activity with second quarter GDP contracting 24%. Well, that doesn't sound like a recession to me. That sounds closer to a depression. David Stockman, who is a long-time declinist, says that coronavirus is sparking a financial crisis, warns Wall Street is toast. It's going to end as a financial crisis because the illusion that central banks always have your back and the economy would keep expanding and growing forever and ever was complete nonsense. I was talking to a friend yesterday, and he was saying, I suppose what some people are saying, that it's time for a shakeout. Well, that may be, and obviously he doesn't have any control over that, and certainly I don't. But I reminded him that in 1914, in the summer of 1914, and for some time earlier, as evidenced by the extraordinary acclaim given to Captain Scott's, his failure, that Britain was feeble and decadent, and that continental Europe was feeble and decadent, and things needed to be shaken up. Well, World War I, or the Great War, as they called it, certainly shook things up. And at the end of it, you had communism, which had taken over Russia. And shortly thereafter, there was a fascist response. There were a lot of people cheering on what became World War II, that, Hitler needs to be settled, that question needs to be settled. Well, at the end of World War II, you had the Soviets in Berlin, and shortly thereafter, the whole world was panicked about it being destroyed by nuclear war. So that is to say that there are unforeseen consequences attached to every disaster, as cleansing as it might appear. So during wartime, there's a phrase called war profiteers. And that is a very bad thing to be called. That is the sort of thing that ruins people's reputations. Well, it used to. Whether that will continue to be the case, I suppose we shall see. GOP Senator John Hoeven, who is a Republican from North Dakota, purchased between $100,000 and $250,000 of stock in a fund invested in health sciences companies in late January, just days after attending a briefing on the federal government's response to the coronavirus. The January 29th purchase of shares in the BlackRock Health Sciences Trust II fund, detailed in Hoeven's financial disclosure report filed in February, came before markets began plunging later that month once the unfolding public health crisis began to affect economies around the world. It came 5 days after Hoeven was briefed by officials from the Centers for Disease Control, the National Institutes of Health, and the State Department on efforts to contain the coronavirus. The purchase came on the same day as the fund's IPO. The fund owns shares in pharmaceutical developers and medical device manufacturers, has outperformed the broader market slightly since Hoeven's purchase. Well, that wouldn't be difficult. Between the market closed January 29th and its open on Friday, BNAS has fallen 20.3% compared with the S&P 500's losses of 25.7%. Spokesman for the senator said that his purchase had nothing to do with the briefing and that he had approved it weeks beforehand. They would say that, wouldn't they? Senator Kelly Loeffler, who does not look like a senator. She looks like a high school girl, or at a prep school, actually. But apparently, she is a Republican, a senator from the state of Georgia. The Senate's newest member sold off 7 figures worth of stock holdings in the days and weeks after a private all-senators meeting on coronavirus. She reported the first sale of stock jointly owned by her and her husband on January 24th, the very day that her committee, the Senate Health Committee, hosted a private all-senators briefing from administration officials, including the CDC director and Anthony Fauci, the head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Appreciate today's briefing from the president's top officials on the novel coronavirus outbreak, she tweeted at the time. And so, let's see. She tweeted February 28th, Democrats have dangerously and intentionally misled the American people on coronavirus readiness. Here's the truth. Real Donald Trump and his administration are doing a great job working to keep Americans healthy and safe. Loeffler's office did not respond to a request for comment from the Daily Beast on the transactions. Late Thursday night, she did offer a statement tweeting, "This is a ridiculous and baseless attack. I do not make investment decisions for my portfolio. Investment decisions are made by multiple third-party advisors without my or my husband's knowledge or involvement." Apparently, she has a lot of trust in these people. She later went on TV to be grilled by Ed Henry on this. Again, she says that the claims are absolutely false. So, a lot of people in the media are having great fun with this, since it's Republicans who seem to be in the forefront of this war profiteering. But I'm reminded of an episode of The Thick of It, where Malcolm Tucker got into an argument, a quarrel actually, with his, let's say, Conservative Party opposite number about the wisdom of, digging up dirt on political opponents. And Malcolm Tucker warned that this would lead to mutually assured destruction. If the Democrats want to play that game, well, perhaps people will start paying a little more attention to Senator Dianne Feinstein of California. She and her husband, Richard Bloom, are very wealthy people. In fact, she has her own personal Gulfstream that she uses to fly between San Francisco and Washington, D.C. There's just a whole host of questionable deals associated with Senator Feinstein, but the one that I heard about years ago has to do with mining, with rare earths. That not very many people talked about rare earths until, I don't know, about a decade ago, and then suddenly everyone was talking about them. They were absolutely essential, critically essential. And it turns out that China controls, something like 95% of the world's supply of rare earths. And why might that be? According to NationalRepublicanTrust.org, a November 2018 report from a private intelligence firm, Defense One, revealed more details of a familiar theme, that China is attempting to halt U.S. production of critical rare earth metals called lanthanides. These are used to produce what the U.S. Department of Defense calls exotic materials. They are used in the production of America's most advanced weapons systems. For well over 2 decades, China has sought to control the world market for rare earths and lanthanides. And in the late 1990s, China accomplished that military objective with the help of Senator Feinstein and then President Bill Clinton. In 1994, Feinstein was the driving force behind the California Desert Protection Act, which protected an unremarkable desert area surrounding the U.S.'s only rare earth mine. There was nothing to protect, no particular species of anything unique, but it did put the mine operations in a precarious situation. Mountain Pass Mine, as it is known, was then owned by a company called Molycorp. Feinstein's California Desert Protection Act effectively gave the Department of the Interior home field advantage when dealing with the mine, since Molycorp's wastewater pipeline passes through a small portion of the newly protected Mojave Desert before reaching its destination in an evaporation pool owned by the mine. By all accounts, Molycorp was a good steward of the government-controlled land that surrounds the mine and had a very good environmental record. In the summer of 1996, a wastewater pipe burst during routine maintenance while being flushed with fresh water. Thousands of gallons of water spilled into the government-protected land, where the parched ground absorbed it a short distance from where it should have been drained and evaporated into desert air. The company immediately reported the spill, and a month later, a coalition of armed government agents, including representatives from the Bureau of Land Management, arrived at Molycorp's gates. A mine employee present that day said it was a SWAT-type raid. They had guns out. Molycorp had already begun to clean up the spill, even though there was no hazardous waste involved. But the federal government, after receiving a letter from Feinstein, halted the cleanup and began a process that would ultimately prevent the mine from producing any more rare earths or lanthanides. That forced the U.S. Department of Defense into the extraordinary position of having to import critical materials for high-tech weapons from communist China. About that time, a communist Chinese state-owned company, Baotu Rare Earths, opened an office in San Francisco. Its representative, Weiji Qi, told investigators at the time that he believed Molycorp would go out of business and that Baotu was preparing to take over the world's lanthanide market, and it did. At the time, Molycorp-owned Mountain Pass Mine provided nearly all of U.S. rare earths and approximately 80% of the world's supply. In a short time, China became the world's leader in rare earths. So, how about that? Huh? How about that? I suppose there's also the question of the Chinese spy that Dianne Feinstein employed as a driver for many years. You know, one wonders exactly what's going on with the handling of the coronavirus in my country. oh no, we're not going to stop people from traveling here from China or Italy or Iran. No, that would be racist. But perhaps there's another reason for this, which is that government officials in my country have been so suborned by the PRC that they are not calling the shots. And the media, of course, is praising China. Oh, they're the world leader in disease safety now, prevention. Really, really. And they are bashing President Trump, especially because of his wickedness in using this term China flu. It kind of makes you wonder about how many people in the media are, in fact, suborned by the PRC. And of course, China did let 5 million people out of Wuhan. They destroyed records. They refused to cooperate with the World Health Organization. But no, apparently they are the good guys now. It's really an extraordinary world in which we live. Okay. As to Trump's culpability in this, well, the New York Times is all over that. Apparently, I don't know. I never understood why it would take 4 people to write one newspaper story. But the New York Times is claiming now that the government knew exactly what was going to happen back in October 2019. Oh, and the Obama administration produced a comprehensive report on the lessons learned by the government from battling Ebola. And let's see, the full story of the Trump administration's response to the coronavirus is still playing out. Government officials, health professionals, journalists, and historians will spend years looking back on the muddled messages and missed opportunities of the past 3 months as President Trump moved from dismissing the coronavirus as a few cases that would soon be under control to his revisionist announcement on Monday that he had known all along that a pandemic was on the way. Well, keep in mind that the New York Times was one of the leaders of the Russian hoax, where apparently Donald Trump was a puppet of Vladimir Putin. The Russians had hacked the 2016 presidential election, and then it all disappeared. There was an impeachment, but it had nothing to do with so-called Russiagate. It was all about the Ukraine, of that same Ukraine that Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, was so fond of because they paid him hundreds of thousands of dollars for an essentially no-show job. I see that the hashtag Where's Joe is trending. Whenever I see a video of Joe in public, I think, okay, there's clever editing that's been done here. A deep fake, perhaps. There was a video, a short video of him at some virtual town hall, and he starts speaking, and then he stops after a few seconds, and then his wife, Dr. Jill Biden, not a medical doctor, comes up to him, whispers something in his ear, kisses him, pats him on the back, and that's it. So where's Joe? Well, I suspect that he's hiding, and it's probably a good thing for his campaign, because you don't want this fellow speaking out in public about important things. Someone that I communicate with says, here's the gist of my argument. It's here, has been for a long time, isn't actually that fatal. The powers that be are taking advantage of the panic to do some major social engineering. The media and government let it get here and seed the population. Now they're the same ones telling us to be afraid to go outside. Apparently, German data suggests that the fatality rate of this disease, at least in that country, is 0.3%. That doesn't sound all that frightening to me, but here we are. Let's see, Brandon Smith says, interesting theory. China runs the American deep state through bribes and kickback schemes and seeks to oust Trump to take over the US and the world. Releasing the virus in Wuhan equals plausible deniability. Jonathan Pohl wishes everyone a happy Kurdish New Year. And also says Victoria virus is a nice name, I think. There could be something to the excessive fear-mongering in the bought and paid-for media to bring about the brave new world order. Well, it all happened so fast. Didn't it? Brandon Smith again says many officials on TV are visibly worried, but then again, they're on the 50-plus side. Well, no, it's funny that I find myself just, watching old TV shows, and I see people shaking hands, and I think, no, you're not supposed to do that. And I see people interacting at close quarters. No, you're not supposed to do that. That's what fear does to people. Social distancing has been rebranded as physical distancing today. Didn't want to send the message that being antisocial might be a way to survive. Easier to bribe than bomb, same end result. Did Mitch McConnell ever investigate Feinstein? If not, why not? I don't believe that there were any investigations of her. But this makes sense on the principle that dogs do not bite dogs. That the Republicans and the Democrats both know that so many of the senators and congressmen are up to their neck in it, and they would just prefer that people not find out. So, why? Oh, Mitch McConnell. Yes, Mitch McConnell's second wife is a Chinese woman. Peter Baumann reports in April 2008, Chow, his wife's name is, I believe, Elaine Chow, his father gave Chow and McConnell between $5 million and $25 million. What's Trump waiting for? He likes to use Twitter. Who's stopping him from exposing Feinstein, says Max Mercer. Brandon Smith, McConnell's high net worth is inexplicable from a life of government service. Well, yes, it's just, I suppose, Bernie people were making fun of Bernie for how indebted he was. This was a few years ago, I guess, when he ran for president in 2016. But you wonder about these people. How do they get to be so rich when they are politicians and who are not really paid all that well? Again, from Peter Baumann. In 2012, the Chow family donated $40 million to the Harvard Business School for scholarships for students of Chinese heritage. That sort of thing makes me angry, Would they be able to get away, someone be able to get away donating $40 million to the Harvard Business School for scholarships of people of, let's say, English or Scottish or Welsh heritage? I rather doubt it. Your show is not appearing in my feed. I don't know what to say. There's been a whole lot of oddness. It was suggested to me that my numbers a couple of days ago indicated that the show was being promoted by a YouTube algorithm, and then it just crashed. And over this week, the chat is not working. It stops working. 99 Julio says, by the way, the 98.4 degrees sake is body temperature. No, it is 0.2 degrees below. And that was the point of the lifesmanship that one gets from Roald Dahl's script for You Only Live Twice. Philip Daniel says, how about scholarships for students of Tibetan or Uyghur or Hmong heritage or other people oppressed by the Han? Oh, wait, don't want to piss off the PRC. No, I suppose one doesn't, okay. We're not that far away from Easter, which has been celebrated by Christians for almost 2 millennia. But if the current trend continues, it would appear that there will be no Easter celebration this year. According to CBS Philly, Archbishop of Philadelphia, Nelson Perez, says now is the time to go into our personal prayer life. It certainly is unsettling, he says, but this is the time to go into our personal prayer life, reading the scriptures, and for us Catholics, the rosary. The praying of the rosary is such a source of consolation, praying together with families. Just last night, a group of young people sent me a picture of them gathering around the table, praying the rosary together and praying with each other. This is time for families to come together in their homes. Well, no, it is always a good thing to celebrate the rosary, but it is the primary duty of priests to offer Mass, to celebrate Mass. But apparently they have received advice from experts and that no, you can't do that. You may have heard of Father Damien of Molokai, who went to tend to the lepers there. He was later immortalized by Robert Louis Stevenson. And of course, in this respect, I'm reminded of a fellow called Herman Cohen, who was a young piano virtuoso who practically grew up in the circle of Franz Liszt. They later had a falling out, although they made it up before their death. And Herman Cohen became a priest and a celebrated preacher in Europe. And he died at Spandau prison in Germany in 1871 because he was ministering to the French prisoners there. But we can't have that sort of thing now. We can't even have priests handing out communion because that would be too risky. Oh, I noticed this myself, that I was watching Red Letter Media, and the picture quality was crummy, and I saw that it was defaulting to 480p. Now I could manually change it to 1080p, but I see Netflix and YouTube reduce resolution as virus hits the web. EU Commissioner for the Digital Economy, Thierry Breton, urged internet giants to switch from high definition to the former standard definition to reduce file sizes while stranded householders seek entertainment as well as news about the epidemic. Netflix has agreed, and so is YouTube. Although videos viewed on the site from a European connection by Friday by Agence France Presse were still defaulting to high definition mode. Oh my God, I hope they've got someone on that problem. The huge file sizes of high definition offerings from web giants such as Netflix, Disney+, Hulu, HBO, and Amazon are slowing the web, Breton warned. Oh, well, I don't know, maybe they could charge people extra, or maybe people will have to get licenses to watch streaming services, government licenses. I mean, I have been mocked in the past for my love of actually owning physical media. But you see, the advantage of that practice is that when I want to watch a movie or a TV show, I just take it off the shelf and put it in my Blu-ray player, and voila. I don't need to send any money to Apple or to the Devil Mouse or anyone like that, and I'm not going to have them deciding to compromise the quality of what I watch. Pot sales jump as more people stay home at bank, according to the stay at home, according to the Bank of America. This is the news that you want to know. More people stuck at home has led to a higher demand for cannabis, and Afria Inc. is one of the best positioned companies to take advantage of that trend. Our checks across North America were consistent. Regardless of region, cannabis purchases have accelerated, analyst Christopher Carey said in a note. While likely on pantry loading, it's not unreasonable to think there will be some boost to per capita consumption as people stay at home longer. This implies that pot is a defensive category like alcohol and tobacco. Kerry upgraded Afria to buy from neutral, although he cut his price target to $5 Canadian from $8 Canadian to reflect the impact of market turbulence on cannabis shares. Now, let's see. Marijuana famously makes people paranoid. Is this the sort of thing that people should be encouraged to indulge in during this panic of the century, this panic of the millennium? Yes, and I suppose Hollywood never misses an opportunity to attempt to make the pornography industry respectable. From The Wrap, why porn stars are in a better spot than Hollywood actors amid coronavirus shutdowns. Let's see, adult video workers are finding themselves in the same boat as those employed by regular films and television productions right now, AVN senior editor Sherry Showless told The Wrap. Based on a strong recommendation from the adult film industry's nonprofit trade group, the Free Speech Coalition. Yeah, spoiler alert, pornography is not speech. Pretty much all porn studios have agreed to shut down for at least the remainder of March. But the actors in Showless's industry have one advantage over the ones The Wrap typically covers. Porn performers have the option of creating solo content. Truth be told, performers on our side are in a better spot because they can still create and make money. Try doing that, Josh Gad and other mainstream movie stars. Josh Gad? This is written by someone called Tony Maglio. And so you think of a Hollywood star, and Josh Gad is the first name that comes to mind. Has there been some sort of massive shift in reality that Josh Gad is a huge film star now? Let's see. Most performers, adult models, and actors are encouraged to utilize their personal time to continue to create content as much as possible. Never let a crisis go to waste. Sarah Vandella, a 13-year-old veteran performer in the business, told The Wrap. While that's generally the case, the suggestion is now more important and more stressed than ever. Solo shoots are of particular and lasting value because performers can make residuals off of their own videos. That's not typical of a studio production. In a studio film, performers generally get paid a daily rate on the same day of the shoot, and when they go home, leaving another party to handle the other aspects of production, like editing, distribution, and promotion. It's all about empowerment. The porn industry is all about empowerment. Fortunately, Vandella has such a personal following, as does Maitland Ward, a rising star in the porn world whom fans of mainstream television will remember as Rachel McGuire on Boy Meets World. You know, it used to be that there were actresses who had taken part in pornography when they were struggling. Sylvester Stallone is one. This caused some embarrassment for him after he became a big star. But apparently now the trade is in the other direction. Speaking of people stuck at home, it seems there's a probably obvious correlation between these coronavirus-forced self-quarantines and a rise in online porn viewership. Popular tube site Pornhub's traffic, and I wonder if they're going to bring down their video quality. Pornhub's traffic from the US, the free pornography website's largest market, was up 6.4% on March 17th and 11.6% worldwide. So I guess that's how we're supposed to wait out the apocalypse, by staying at home, not having contact with other people, smoking pot, and masturbating to pornography. Oh, brave new world that has such people in it. So I noticed a curious thing when they have added it. Finally, perhaps people complained because the government of Canada, Department of Health, has a page, coronavirus COVID-19 outbreak update. And I went there and I thought, okay, X number of cases. How many deaths have there been? And I thought, there's no deaths listed on this page, which suggests to me that there haven't been many deaths. Well, they have added it. So now there are 898 confirmed cases of the virus in Canada. Canada has a population of 37 million people. There have been 12 deaths. 12 deaths. One can see how numbers like that are going to inspire panic. Eh? So BC, which leads in this grim table. Actually, Ontario has 308 cases, but of course, Ontario's population is more than twice as large as BC's. But BC does have the highest number of deaths at 8 out of 12. And apparently, about half these deaths are from one old age home in Lynn Valley, North Vancouver. It's fairly obvious to me why British Columbia has proportionally the highest number of cases, and certainly the actual highest number of deaths is because BC hosts the biggest Oriental population in Canada. But I suppose it's not the done thing to do to mention that. Vancouver Island, where I live, how many people have coronavirus or confirmed cases? 22. 22 cases on the world's 8th largest island. And it is a ghost town. It's a ghost town. Oh, and if that were not bad enough, and again, if this is funny, I can't help laughing. This is a story from Vancouver Island CTV News, and it is from Friday, March the 20th, today. The BC government is warning residents that Asian giant hornets, which first appeared on Vancouver Island last year, could return this spring and summer. The Asian giant hornets were first discovered in BC in the Nanaimo region in August. Concerns about the predatory hornets remained until September, when a group of local beekeepers found and destroyed a nest in the Nanaimo area. While the giant hornets remained dormant in Western Canada in the fall and winter, the BC government is warning residents of a return of the insects in Washington state. I wonder how these Asian giant hornets managed to get to Canada and Washington state. I'm assuming that they didn't fly across the Pacific Ocean. Perhaps it was some other manner in which these noxious insects were introduced into our ecosystem. As far as panic goes, I suppose after Italy, the country which appears to be the very most panicked would be Great Britain. And things are moving fast there. Oh, before we talk about that, Purell manufacturers hit with class action lawsuit for misleading claims on effectiveness in helping prevent disease, as shelves are wiped clean of the hand sanitizer. Well, lawyers as a class are never one to let a crisis go to waste. But in the meantime, furious Brits call for boycott of Wetherspoons after its CEO Tim Martin says closing pubs is over the top because you can't get coronavirus in bars, and adds he would take the opportunity to catch it. This Tim Martin fella seems like a bit of a card. Brits are threatening to boycott JD Wetherspoon today. Conservative Party donor and Wetherspoon CEO Tim Martin sparked fury as he said closing pubs was over the top, in spite of warnings from the government's chief science advisor that they are a breeding ground for the virus. Well, apparently everything is a breeding ground for a virus. The buses in Victoria and Nanaimo are free now, but nobody seems to want to go anywhere. People have to enter and leave by the rear doors, and they are warned to stay as far away from other people on the bus as possible. So, why are buses still running then? I'm not certainly advocating that they should stop running, but I live very close to one of Victoria's main arteries. So there are a lot of buses that run down my street, and these are the long ones, and I'm seeing about 2 people on each bus. So asked if he was nervous about criticizing political supporters of Boris Johnson, the spokesman said, "We've based all our decisions on the best scientific evidence and will continue to do so." Boris Johnson this week was met with anger from the hospitality industry as he told people not to visit pubs, clubs, and cafes, but stopped short of closing them, meaning venues are losing footfall and cannot claim insurance. The mayor of London, yes, has since threatened to ban people from pubs, warning he will infringe human rights if necessary. You remember this is the same mayor of London who said that terrorist attacks were just, one of the prices that one had to pay for living in major cities. Yeah. So terrorist attacks, got to learn to live with them. Wouldn't want to take any steps to minimize them because that would be stigmatizing. But how about, cutting off all human intercourse? No, that would not be extreme. Okay, so breaking news. All pubs, clubs, restaurants, and gyms will shut tonight in coronavirus battle. Boris Johnson made the unprecedented announcement this evening, ordering all venues to shut their doors as the government tries to battle the outbreak. Cinemas, gyms, leisure centres, and cafes will also close across Britain in a desperate bid to save British lives as the death toll rose to 177 in the UK today. And the question that I'm asking, and I'm not the only one, is how many people in Britain could be expected to die of, say, influenza, pneumonia, other respiratory ailments in the first 3 months of the year? I suspect it's rather higher than 177. The good news is that restaurants in Britain will still be allowed to do takeaways, but supermarkets are unlikely to be affected at this stage. It is unclear if outdoor leisure centers such as tennis courts and 5-a-side pitches will be included. Speaking tonight, Boris Johnson said, bit by bit, day by day, by your actions, your restraint, and your sacrifice, we are putting this country in a better and stronger position where we will be able to save literally thousands of lives of people of all ages, people who don't deserve to die now. We are going to defeat this disease with a huge national effort to slow the spread by reducing social contact. So, stores stripped in Britain. A pensioner pictured standing in a supermarket aisle, stripped bare by panic. Panic buyers is 79-year-old retired seaman Anthony Glynn, who was gallantly out buying for his desperate elder neighbors. This is according to the Daily Mail. Glynn had decided to defy government advice, telling people over 70 with underlying health issues like him to remain in their homes because of coronavirus. Despite having had heart bypass surgery and suffering from other ailments over the last 2 years, he was determined to try and buy toilet paper and other essentials for 2 ladies in their late 80s. Speaking from his home in Epsom, Glynn said he was shocked when he saw the bare shelves in the supermarket, which left him seething with anger about the selfish way Brits have responded to the coronavirus pandemic. Standing in the desolated aisle, squinting at a piece of paper he was holding, he said he was trying to read his shopping list, but had left his glasses at home. The devastating issue of Glynn taking in a Sainsbury's store in Epsom earlier this week sparked nationwide sympathy and has become an iconic image of the cold-hearted panic buying currently engulfing the country. Glynn said, "It's disgraceful how people in this country have become so selfish and are panic buying. We are in the middle of a national crisis, but everybody is just out for themselves. I was livid when I was in Sainsbury's because it shows you what a greedy society we have become. But that's not how I was brought up, and it's not who I am. I wasn't worried about going out because I have a lot of fight in me. I was just trying to help 2 ladies who were worse off than me. I don't want any medals for this. It's just basic human decency. Well, I kind of think that one of the messages being told to people, perhaps in their 80s, in their 70s, maybe even younger, is hurry up and die. You are a drain on resources. There is a big realignment coming, and you just use up too much and contribute too little. That may sound paranoid of me, although I have not been smoking pot. I've never smoked pot. But yeah, so these stores could have taken measures right at the beginning. 12 rolls of double ply toilet paper, that's enough to keep most people going for quite some time. But people were buying 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these packages and hauling them home. And until very recently, these large chain stores decided not to impose restrictions. So that poor Mr. Glenn and his the 80-year-old ladies who lived near to him, they're left out. Another story from the Mail. A distraught critical care nurse who was unable to buy basic foods following a 48-hour shift has urged shoppers to stop stripping supermarket shelves amid the coronavirus pandemic. In a heartbreaking appeal, Dawn Bilbrow, 51, from York, who had just completed a lengthy and exhausting shift, explained that she had visited her supermarket to pick up basic food items for the next 2 days when she was left having a little cry. After discovering there were no fruit and vegetables for her to sustain a healthy living amid the COVID-19 outbreak, the healthcare worker made a tearful plea to the public, urging them to just stop it. I recall when there was a terrorist attack in London, what they called the 7/7 attack, which I believe was in, when was that, 2005? That there was this piece by Bob Tyrrell talking about Mrs. Miniver, and the wartime spirit, and this was going to be recovered. And I thought, no, well, Mrs. Miniver and all that is long gone. And I suspect that there are people who, read about those people who can't get food, and they think they should have moved faster then, shouldn't they? They should have hoarded, as I have, because hoarders are the best people in the world, certainly the smartest, the ones with the most foresight. As I've explained many times, it's not the virus that's the danger, it's the stigma. That's what our chief medical officer, Dr. Teresa Tam, says. That's what the World Health Organization says. And actor Daniel Day Kim revealed in an Instagram video, but of course, that he was diagnosed with coronavirus on Thursday. In the same video, the lost actor used his platform to decry the inexcusable racism being exhibited across the country towards Asians and Asian Americans, and implored people to stop being prejudiced. Since the disease, which originated in a region of China, began rapidly spreading across the US, so have instances of anti-Asian hate crimes. No details follow. Speaking from his home in Hawaii, where he is isolating, the 51-year-old actor said, please stop the prejudice and senseless violence against Asian people. Randomly beating elderly, sometimes homeless Asian Americans is cowardly, heartbreaking, and it's inexcusable. When people are ill, what matters most is how best to take care of ourselves and one another. I suspect if the Mail had video of elderly Asian women being beaten up by white bigots, they would be running that video. I think that everyone would be running that video. I suppose it's possible that it has happened, and there's no doubt in my mind that xenophobia, which is the natural condition of mankind, is making a comeback for rather obvious reasons, like the coronavirus and giant hornets. What other goodies do they have waiting for us? The Mail has thoughtfully provided a list of celebrities who have tested positive for coronavirus. Rudy Gobert, who is apparently a basketballer, Tom Hanks and his lovely wife, Rita Wilson, another basketballer named Donovan Mitchell, Sophie Gregoire Trudeau, who is the wife of Canada's Prime Minister, Fabio Weingarten, who is an aide to Brazilian President Bolsonaro, Francis Suarez, the mayor of Miami, Lucien Grange, the CEO of Universal Music, Idris Elba, the actor, and apparently Idris got it from Sophie Trudeau. A hug, he says. Okay. Christopher Hivju from Game of Thrones, Olga Kurylenko from Quantum of Solace, and Rachel Matthews from Frozen 2. Yeah, the celebrities, we want to hear all about the celebrities and how they're coping because they're the most important people in the world. I see that David Hockney has painted a pretty picture of daffodils, and I applaud that. Anthony Hopkins made a video of him playing piano to entertain his cat. I quite like Anthony Hopkins, and I quite like cats. So that was pleasing to see. Other activities of the celebs are not so pleasing, and I'll be getting to that soon. YT says, I go on 1 hour long walks daily. I'll go nuts quick if I can't go outside. Now, I keep reading that apparently walking for as little as 30 minutes at a time, if you do that every day, you're going to significantly reduce your risk of serious illness and death. A Walrus Lolbertarian says, KMG is my new Fox News. Well, I'm proud to play that role. Locally, a store, I guess, they've already started reserving 8 to 9 a.m. for seniors only. It is a good idea. Are we done with the coronavirus yet? Asked YT. Ugh, people in New York City are hysterical. The same people who are afflicted with TDS. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the week, I like to provide a variety of topics on this show. And then when I comb through, the Mail, the New York Post, New York Times, Drudge, the Canadian equivalent of Drudge, Canada Newswatch, there are no other stories. Everything appears to be coronavirus related, adjacent. And again, if you ever wondered how powerful the media was, if you ever wondered about the media's power to manufacture consent, as Chomsky and Herman put it, now you can't doubt this, because okay, you're all going to know about this. It's all anyone is going to talk about or think about, and it is your duty to be absolutely terrified. And it's the worst thing, just stay away from people, because hell is other people, as Jean-Paul Sartre told us. Chad says, I've been hiking every day, just staying away from people. Well, yeah, as I say, walking down the street, someone is coming up to me, and you can see that both of us are trying to maximize our distance. I actually, I suppose because I've got gray hair, I've seen women actually walk out onto the highway to avoid, getting within, a yard from me. It's funny. Dawn from Beyond says, it's so stupid. The sick and immunocompromised are the ones who should be in quarantine, not the masses of people. Half Galician says, Britain will defeat coronavirus so they can install Huawei antenna. Brandon Smith says, the age of decadence is over and not coming back. I'm going to get back to the celebrities in a minute. But I suppose it was around the time, I suppose I've been reading celebrity gossip now for about 20 years. And around 15 years ago, I thought these people, they're going to pull back because they don't understand how obnoxious they have become. Now, with the financial crisis in 2008, okay, I thought, all right, the celebrities are going to understand that they have to pull back, that they can't be, throwing themselves at us every day, saying stupid, inane things, doing stupid things, etc., etc. But no, it's gotten worse. It's gotten much worse, and apparently it is going to continue to get worse until something bad happens. Brandon Smith says all the celebrities who have tested positive for coronavirus, complete list, and I only recognize 3 names out of about 40. Yeah. In recovery says day number 3, I haven't gotten notification that your show was on. I had to find it in my subscription list. Well, all I can say is that, perhaps because of, greater usage and the like, YouTube is having problems. This is my good taste show, and I'm striving mightily to remain within the limits of good taste, and YouTube's terms and conditions. A final story from Britain here. Okay, at Asda, which is a popular grocery chain, people were fighting over water, okay? And some fellow was not allowed to get as much water as he wanted, and he was furious. And this is my comment of the day from the comment section from the Daily Mail: fighting over water? If only there was some way the government or local councils could help distribute water to every household. In fact, if they used a system of pipes, they could make water available whenever people wanted it. And that is an excellent suggestion. And I hope the authorities in Britain get right on top of it. So I want to talk about the media. They're the real heroes. Can there be any doubt that in this age of anxiety, this age of terror, that the journalists are the real heroes? NBC News' Lester Holt on reporting the coronavirus. We've all covered the burning house, but this time we're in the house. Oh, okay. So what we've got now are journalists repeating tropes from horror films, and they expect to be acclaimed for this. Now, I've been a journalist in the past. I was a journalist for, a quarter century or so. And journalists are vain people. They like to be noticed. And one of the best ways to get noticed is to be attacked by a public figure. I remember years ago when Reagan was president and the CBS Evening News. Remember when the Evening News was a big deal, network news? And I was watching it. I made a habit. And it seemed like Dan Rather opened his show every day with the homeless crisis in the United States, which of course was personally and solely Ronald Reagan's fault. And so Reagan watched Dan Rather on CBS. And so he decided to call up Rather, privately, to chide him over this. Just, you were taking action. You don't know, there are things that are out of my control, et cetera, et cetera. Well, Dan Rather got on his high horse and started complaining about how outrageous this was and how Reagan was obviously trying to stifle freedom of the press. And I thought, what a creep this man is. If I got a personal phone call from the president of the United States, regardless of who that president was, I'd be pretty chuffed with myself. And so we go forward to the present day, and Oliver Darcy of CNN Business has a story. Trump viciously attacks NBC News reporter in extended rant after being asked for message to Americans worried about coronavirus. And here is this man, a rather distinguished looking man, but he just has this why are you picking on me look on his face. And it is most amusing. In an extraordinary exchange on Friday, President Donald Trump viciously attacked an NBC News reporter who asked what his message would be to Americans who are frightened by the coronavirus pandemic that is spreading across the country. The exchange, which occurred at the White House's daily coronavirus task force briefing, began when NBC News reporter Peter Alexander asked Trump whether he was giving Americans false hope by touting unproven coronavirus drugs. Toward the end of the exchange, Alexander cited the latest pandemic statistics showing thousands of Americans are now infected and millions are scared. Alexander asked, "What do you say to Americans who are scared?" Trump, shaking his head, ripped into Alexander in response, "I say that you are a terrible reporter. That's what I say." The president proceeded to launch into an extended rant against Alexander, saying he asked a nasty question and assailing NBC and its parent company, Comcast. "You're doing sensationalism," Trump charged, and the same with NBC and Comcast. I don't call it Comcast, I call it Concast. "Let me just tell you something," Trump added. "That's really bad reporting, and you ought to get back to reporting instead of sensationalism." Moments later, Caitlin Collins, a White House correspondent for CNN, asked Trump if it was appropriate to embark on tirades against members of the news media during a public health crisis. "You see yourself as a wartime president right now, leading the country through a pandemic that we are experiencing. Do you think going off on Peter, going off on a network is appropriate when the country is going through something like this?" Trump defended his verbal assault on Alexander, saying he's not a good journalist and launching into another rant against him. Coming together is much harder when we have dishonest journalists. Alexander said in a statement that he was trying to provide the president an opportunity to reassure the millions of Americans, members of my own family and my neighbors and my community and plenty of people sitting at home. This was his opportunity to do that, to provide a positive or uplifting message. Instead, you saw the president's answer to that question right now. The bottom line is, this is a president whose experiences in life are very different than most Americans across the country right now. Not a person who likely worries about finances or had, not a person who in the course of his life is worried about his future, not a person who is worried about where to find a paycheck for his bills or for his rent, and is evidenced by the president suggesting that an opportunity to provide for Americans some assurance about how they should feel right now. The president instead took it out on me. I'm going to suggest that a man who made his fortune in the construction industry, the hotel industry, actually has worried a great deal about a future. We're talking about a man who took a $1 billion personal write-down. It's just, so it's the job of the president of the United States to somehow control Americans' feels now. Is it? This is just, Britt Hume said that this was a typical hack question, and it is a hack question. It is one of the worst cliches of journalism, and you see it in all sorts of versions. How did you feel when you found out that your son had been murdered? Oh, I don't know. You could probably guess how I felt at that moment. What do you say to Americans who are scared? It's too funny. Oh, Trump then praised a far-right media outlet. Oh, and what, CNN isn't going to mention it. I believe he's referring to OAN, saying it is very good and noting they treat me very nicely. The right-wing personality from that media outlet, apparently that person has no name, unlike hero Peter Alexander. So the right-wing personality from that media outlet falsely said major newsrooms had teamed up with the Chinese Communist Party to attack Trump. The person then asked, is it alarming that major media players just oppose you are consistently siding with foreign state propaganda, Islamic radicals, and Latin gangs and cartels. This was the same media, keep this in mind, that suggested that there was something racist about Trump wanting to keep MS-13 out of America. These people are absolutely shameless. That they talk about, oh, Russian propaganda. No, but there's no propaganda from the Ukraine. There's no slush fund money. And of course, there's no such thing as Chinese propaganda. Oh, what about all those journalists that Putin personally killed? Oh, so people in Russia are apparently allowed to print things which might infuriate the regime? Because that's not the case in China. There is no independent media in China. Everybody in the media in China works for the government. But no, you wouldn't want to attack that. So Trump on Thursday boasted that he had canceled the White House's subscriptions to the country's major newspapers. It amazes me when I read the things that I read. It amazes me when I read the Wall Street Journal, which is so negative, and the New York Times. I barely read it. We don't distribute it in the White House. And the same with the Washington Post. Okay, more from Oliver Darcy. Someone left this note for the OAN personality at the White House. You see, he's a man with no name. He's been stripped of his humanity, much like people are stripped of their humanity in the People's Republic of China. Quote, do you think your question was helpful in halting the spread of the coronavirus? Let's see, 2.1K retweets, 11.7K hearts, and 5.6K responses. Martian Orthodox, which is a Twitter account that I follow, says no one cares about your blue check on blue check cat fighting drama. Asha Rangappa, this seems like a reliable woman. I think it's time for the media to address the elephant in the room. Trump may be incapable of understanding the problem. It involves data, graphs, projections, connecting dots, conceptual thinking. I think he fundamentally cannot mentally grasp it. Again, this is a man who made his fortune building hotels and resorts. So I think he actually does have some, experience with dealing with data, graphs, projections, connecting dots, conceptual thinking. Here's a piece of conceptual thinking for you, that Trump realized that he didn't actually have to build hotels himself. He could just effectively sell his name. That hotels, which were owned by other parties, they would provide certain, guarantees, etc. And then they could be called a Trump hotel. That, to me, is a pretty nifty example of conceptual thinking. David Frum, I have no interest in what David Frum has to say about anything. Again, he should have, retired to a life of solitude, considering what he said during the lead up to the invasion of Iraq. Happy to see KMG laugh at this, says YT. Well, one laughs lest one weep. Who said that? Horace Walpole, I think. John Miller says the national media is praising Cuomo for taking draconian measures. Yes. Wait a minute. I thought draconian measures were generally considered to be a bad thing. There was some fatuous piece, essay. Oh, Carl Schmitt. And I spent months talking about Carl Schmitt, so I know a little bit about him. That people have said that Trump is a Schmittian president, and that, the emergency, the singularity of emergency. Well, here's that emergency, and what has Trump done? And I thought, is this fellow seriously arguing that Trump is not a fascist dictator, but now that's a bad thing? Jonathan Pohl says not much to go out to since all eateries, including Starbucks, are takeaway only. YT says, I can't believe they have us all sitting at home. It's embarrassing how impressionable and controllable we are. Even if you are a Dem, says Walrus Libertarian, you have to admit that political pandering and gotcha questions from the media are really gross right now. I just wonder how in Canada it's a little different. The questions from the media are generally along the lines, for our Prime Minister of, how did you get to be so damn awesome? Is it true, Mr. Prime Minister, that people are all around the world are applauding the steps that Canada has taken to fight the deadly coronavirus, including not blocking travel from certain places such as China, Italy, or Iran? Yes. Okay. The biggest threat of being caught is by an indignant citizen who takes matters into their own hands. Actually have been writing a lot, as psychoanalysts are now saying our ego has been dethroned by the pandemic. This is our chance to listen to the unconscious. Writing is one day. Okay, for all of those people who are stepping out, if only to get some exercise, yeah, here's the plan, people. Be in utter panic, terror, get no exercise. So you want to combine the two things, because that in no way would be, immunosuppressive. Okay, so what are we going to talk about now? Are we done with the media? Oh, yeah. Let's talk about the coming road war. Evelyn Waugh was criticized for the names that he created for many of the American characters in his novels, Bub Schlub, something like that. I don't know. It was obviously a parody, but yeah, there's no name that you could come up now that could be a parody. The mayor of Philadelphia is a black woman called London, spelled exactly like the city, Breed. And the police commissioner of Philadelphia is a black woman called Danielle Outlaw. Yeah, that's right. Outlaw. One day after Philadelphia courts closed until April the 1st to limit the spread of the coronavirus, Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw notified commanders Tuesday that police will be delaying arrests for nonviolent crimes, including drug offenses, theft, and prostitution. The announcement came in an internal memo outlining protections, including social distancing during roll call. They're going to need a bigger room. They're going to need a much bigger room then for roll call. And emphasizing the importance of the public safety as well as the safety of officers. A bold-faced, yellow-highlighted paragraph notes that if an officer believes that releasing the offender would pose a threat to public safety, the officer will notify a supervisor who would decide whether the suspect should be held. The Fraternal Order of Police issued a statement supporting the decision, which covers all narcotics offenses, thefts, burglary, vandalism, prostitution, stolen cars, economic crimes such as bad checks and fraud, and any existing bench warrants. So we're going to make it a crime to be out on the streets. But apparently, narcotics offenses, thefts, burglary, vandalism, prostitution, stealing cars, economic crimes, bad checks, fraud, they're not crimes anymore. It's the being out in public part. Actually, I suppose that if everyone was forbidden to go outside, then one would expect that crime rates would fall, except there's the possibility that everyone would start killing each other in isolation. I actually witnessed when I was, how old was I? About 16 years old, an actual case of cabin fever in an actual cabin. My rich uncle owned a half share in a condo in Whistler. Now, keep in mind, this is before Whistler became Whistler, you know, Canada's Aspen. It wasn't such a big deal then. But anyway, there were my parents, their 6 children, including myself, and a married couple that were friends, and their 2 children. And we're all in this cabin. And after like day 3, the American wife made her American husband a sandwich and brought it to the table where he was sitting, and he just snapped completely. I'm going to use some foul language here. He turned red in the face and he screamed, "You call this a fucking sandwich?" And I thought, wow. So cabin fever is actually a real thing. You know, I love it when cliches come to life. So do you think that the police are going to be particularly active in Philadelphia in arresting anybody for everything? Apparently, they're scared about getting too close to each other in roll call. You know, a lot of these, a lot of the people that police arrest in cities, you know, how would I put it? Their level of sanitation is not exactly top notch, right? So the DA of Philadelphia is a man called Larry Krasner. He fights for equal justice for the great people of Philadelphia. A fair and effective criminal justice system makes us safer. I think it would be fair to say that Larry Krasner is beloved by the criminal class, because when he was running for the position of district attorney, his admirers in the audience would begin a chant, and it's a well-known chant in certain circles: "Fuck the police." So that's the kind of man responsible for criminal enforcement in the great city of Philadelphia. Yes. Okay, and I'm looking at a copy. Oh, let's see. Most importantly, we want all of our members to stay healthy. You have control over the most important things you can do to protect yourself. The first is to respect the recommended social distance of 6 feet. Wow, I thought it was 3 feet, but apparently it's been bumped up to 6. When possible, during interactions with people. Also, wash your hands regularly with soap and water. Please wear nitrile gloves. And when removing the gloves, do so without touching the outside of the glove. Whether wearing protective gloves or not, do not touch your face. OEM is in the process of purchasing additional personal protective equipment for all officers. Don't touch your face. Did you see Anthony Fauci was blatantly, he had his whole hand on his face? Did you see that? People were saying that's because he had to listen to Trump. But isn't this the top guy? Wow, he was just exposing his face to millions, possibly millions of virulent germs. Too shocking. So what's going on in the great city of Baltimore? What do they call it? Bodymore Murderland? That's the joke. He begs residents to stop shooting each other. Please, people, enough with the killing, all right? It reminds me of this, the end of this really stupid Stephen King movie. You know, if you watched movies in the 80s or 90s, you know, if you lived in a place where people were renting movies, you watched a lot of Stephen King properties, and I must have seen about 24 of them. So Needful Things, okay. I believe the late Max von Sydow was in it. So there's this haunted shop. There was a pretty good parody of it on Rick and Morty. And they buy these things, and it's kind of like the Red Shoes, you know, from Folktale, Hans Christian Andersen, that, oh, they give you magical power for dancing, but then they make you dance until you die, right? Ooh, irony, savage irony. So the whole town is possessed by this malevolent spirit in Needful Things. And at the end, I'm trying to think of the actor's name, but I'm drawing a blank. That he appeals to the townspeople. He's like, townspeople, what has come over you? Enough with the raping and the killing and the stealing. That's not who we are. And then the townspeople all sort of look, abashed and ashamed. And yeah, he makes a good point. We've just gone totally nuts with the raping and the killing and all the rest of it. I mean, we got to pull ourselves together. So you have the mayor of Baltimore begging residents to stop shooting each other. Baltimore Mayor Jack Young urged residents to put down their guns and heed orders to stay home after multiple people were shot Tuesday night amidst the coronavirus pandemic. Well, Blaise Pascal, whose Pensées we're going to be talking about in the book club in a couple of weeks, said that, and I'm paraphrasing here, that all of man's problems result from his inability to sit quietly in a chair. And these people, the people who like to shoot each other, they're people who like to go out. So what do you mean you're telling me? You're telling me I have to stay home? Well, how can I shoot people if I stay home? Sure, I can shoot the people in my crib, but then there'll be no one to shoot. I suppose I could shoot from my window, try to pick off people in the street. Yeah, perhaps I'll do that. So Mayor Jack Young said, I want to reiterate, or repeat as other people would say, how completely unacceptable the level of violence is that we have seen recently. We will not stand for mass shootings and an increase of crime. For those of you who want to continue to shoot and kill people of this city, we're not going to tolerate it. We're going to come after you and we're going to get you. Oh, Baltimore is the same city where not the last mayor, but the one before that, their last mayor before Young, I believe, is going to prison now. And the mayor before that decided she was just going to let the city burn. People had their grievances, and one of the grievances was against the police. Baltimore is a city where the cops are terrified that any actions that they take against malefactors is going to result in their own arrest and personal ruin. So no, I don't think the Baltimore police are too keen on coming after you and getting you. He urged people to put down their guns because we cannot clog up our hospitals and their beds with people that are being shot senselessly. That's the people who are in hospitals in Baltimore. That's how the city works, because we're going to need those beds for people infected with the coronavirus. And it could be your mother, your grandmother, or one of your relatives. Yeah, well, mothers, grandmothers, and your relatives are shot regularly for no reason in Baltimore. So take that into consideration. It's one of the funniest things in the world when you have an impotent man pretending that he has power. And that's what we see with the mayor of Baltimore. Let's see. A city officer who was on patrol in a microzone. What is a microzone? Did engage with a person who's believed to be a suspect in the shooting as the man was fleeing the scene. The officer was not armed with the level of deadly firepower that the suspect had. The officer did fire his weapon, but Harrison said police don't know if the officer struck the suspect. The level of deadly firepower? What? Was he carrying a machine gun? A rocket launcher? Okay. So, well, I'm awfully glad that I don't live in Baltimore. I visited once. Apparently, I went to see Edgar Allan Poe's grave. I'm an admirer of that fellow. And so I've told this story before, but I'm going to tell it again now because we're talking about Baltimore. So, they have this squid port or whatever, the Inner Harbor, which is very popular. There's a tourist bureau there. So I thought this will be handy. And so I walk in there and I say, could you give us directions to the grave of Edgar Allan Poe? And the fellow there said, who? Never heard of him. And then he turned to someone else in the office and said, you ever heard of Edgar Allan Poe? Nope, I haven't. And I thought, oh man, how many times has he pulled that joke, eh? Wow, that just gets funnier and funnier. Anyway, it turns out it wasn't all that far from the squid port. So I walked down the street, and I noticed that it was getting sketchier and sketchier the closer I got to the gravesite. And in retrospect, I thought it was probably a bad idea. You know, when the street is deserted of people and you can see, you know, discarded newspapers swirling in the wind, it was rather like that. British Americans said re-decoupling our new old attitude to China should be, China is a distant country of which we know little and care even less, riffing on what Neville Chamberlain, he was much mocked subsequently for saying that Czechoslovakia was a far away country of which we know little. Well, it was simply the truth. Baltimore, the home of Babe Ruth and H.L. Mencken, too. Yeah, I was interested in, you know, seeing the grave of Mencken, but then I thought I'd kind of pushed it, you know, by my journey to the grave of Edgar Allan Poe. Baltimore former Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake said they were allowing writers space to destroy. Yes, that's true. Yes, actually, space to destroy. Does that mayor imagine that Baltimoreans actually read newspapers? Yeah. Let's see. Dawn from Beyond says, uh-oh, red shoes have a different connotation now. What connotation would that be? I was thinking of scheduling the Archers movie, The Red Shoes, for Theater Thursday because it's one of my favorite movies. The funny thing is that I don't like ballet. I think of it as an opera divertissement that got a little too big for its capriccios. You know, if ballet dancers could actually fly, I think I would like ballet a lot more. And in The Red Shoes, the dancers actually fly. They can also change their identity at will, completely, you know, change their appearance, which is, you know, that's pretty exciting too. Okay, party animals, yes. MCT says no bailout for BA. I'm still angry about being made an involuntary stockholder for General Motors. Boeing. Are there people, you know, responsible for the downfall of that once great American company? Is there any possibility that it's made mandatory that if there is any kind of bailout, that the people responsible are named and shamed? You know, perhaps if they, you know, want to help out the company, want to help out the shareholders, you know, they have to come to a press conference and, you know, make some sort of ritual act of contrition, you know, much as the Romans used to. I think that would be good to bring that back. Don from Beyond says, red shoes are connected with Luciferian rights, Pizzagate, etc. Yes, I guess I'd forgotten that, and I have seen Eyes Wide Shut. So let's move on to the book club, which is a lighter subject this week. The book is called The James Bond Dossier, and it is by the late Sir Kingsley Amis, who lived from 1922 to 1995 and is one of my very favorite writers. You know, Anthony Burgess pointed out that in his own way, Amis was as much of an experimentalist as Ernest Hemingway had been. Is that in his later books, Amis evolved a style which was an attempt, you know, to express the thoughts of characters while they were having them in a more naturalistic way that had been attempted previously. Amis was a university professor. It's funny. I don't know that he liked being a professor all that much, but he was educated at Oxford, and he said that the best teacher that he ever had was C.S. Lewis, and the very worst that he ever had was J.R.R. Tolkien. But you should keep in mind that Amos absolutely hated, loathed medieval literature. So Amos had a huge success with his very first novel, and it was called Lucky Jim. And I suppose, one of his great friends was the poet and librarian, Philip Larkin. And it seemed to be in later years, Larkin became a little grumpy about this because, it was Amos's first novel, and Larkin had already been published as a novelist. And so apparently Larkin gave Amos some advice about structuring and the like, and things to cut out. And he seemed to believe that he'd been cheated of recognition. One would have thought that he would just have been pleased that his friend had had such success. The funny thing about Amos is, of course, that he taught at University College Swansea, and he also taught at Cambridge. He taught at Princeton. But in his later years, he seemed to become rather anti-intellectual. His son, Martin Amos, also novelist, remarked upon this. He said that Terminator 2 was a perfect movie. Well, it's kind of hard to argue about that. Ian Fleming, of course, is the man who created James Bond. He also wrote a bestseller for children, which was made into a movie called Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. He lived from 1908 to 1964. And the Bond books started coming out. What was the first one? It was in 1955, I believe. And after JFK, president at the time, said that he was an admirer of James Bond, that the sales in the United States took off. The movies started coming out, 1962, and the James Bond cult is still here. I had seen a bunch of the movies. I talked about that yesterday on Theater Thursday, before I had read any of the books. And so I started buying the books, the pan paperbacks, which had exquisite covers, really simple ideas, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, there is snow. It's fake snow, a wedding ring, and a little splash of blood. Very, very simple, but very elegant. Of course, the hardcover books were beautifully illustrated as well. So I must have had about 6 or 8 of these books. And then my father found out that I had them, and then he confiscated them from me on the grounds of smut. I was about 14 at the time. And I don't know what happened then was that he read all the novels and then he gave them back to me. And Amos deals with what is the appeal of James Bond, and he talks about the criticism that they're escapist. But before I go into that, he talks about the difference between Fleming and other well-known contemporary spy novelists, such as John le Carré and Len Deighton. He said, of course, the books themselves would have to be taken in hand too. Enough of efficiency, of pace, of craftsman-like attention to detail. Portentousness is the thing to go for. What about a few dreams, known as the handy off-the-peg method of injecting significance into any form of fiction? Those nightmares in The Man with the Golden Gun are concerned with simple terror. Exposure to fire from a cannon, seeing sharks eating a corpse, being tied down at the bottom of the sea, nothing decently Freudian or expressionist there. Then there ought to be a good salting of references to, say, Kokoschka, Schoenberg, Reg Butler, and Norman Douglas, and long passages of paraded lyricism. Things like the opening of On Her Majesty's Secret Service won't send anyone's stock up. When looked at with any attention, that scene emerges as an engagingly dreamy marine landscape with figurines but so much is going on in the way of social observation and gathering menace that a reviewer doesn't notice. Also, it's too short, and the mention of Boudin, Tissot, and Monet, step in the right direction, nevertheless, Mr. Fleming, is too curt. A 3-page paragraph of elaborate comparison with nothing happening at all is the minimum. And I quoted that passage because of a comment that I'd made about Amos's anti-intellectualism. Now, the case of the man with the golden gun is germane, particularly germane, because there's mystery about this. But that it would appear that Fleming's publisher, Jonathan Cape, wondered about the publishability of Fleming manuscripts, unpublished manuscripts, when he died. And upon reading The Man with the Golden Gun, apparently Amos came to the conclusion that it should not be published. But then Amos had some suggestions, much like Philip Larkin had for him. And so the novel eventually came out, although Amos actually reviewed the book, and he writes about it in the James Bond dossier. He is not as keen on it as the others, for one reason, because he thinks that Scaramanga is not in the same villain class, say, as Hugo Drax or Ernst Stavro Blofeld. He begins the book thus. This essay started in my mind as a modest article of about 5,000 words. As you can see, it grew in the writing. For every point I made, I discovered 2 fresh ones that needed making, so that at times I wondered if I was ever going to get to the finish. In a way, this experience confirms what I felt about the Bond books before I even started work on them. Indeed, part of my motive for writing about them was my conviction, vague at that stage but firm, that they were more than simple cloak and dagger stories with a bit of fashionable affluence and sex thrown in. I suspect that, on the contrary, I would find them to be just as complex and to have just as much in them as more ambitious kinds of fiction. I was right. I felt, too, perhaps more strongly, that the works of Mr. Fleming deserved a thorough look because of the scale on which they are read. In the paperback form, 9 of them have now passed the million mark. Well, now they're past the 10 million mark now. I was impressed by the motive for which every one of these readers reads them: pleasure. As a recently retired university teacher, I can't help being slightly drawn to any form of writing which, like science fiction, reaches no part of its audience through compulsion. 1 volunteer is worth 10 pressed men. And that is absolutely, absolutely true. That we're supposed to look down on writers who write to please, but why else would a novelist write? We're not talking about, a work of mathematics. We're not talking about a work of philosophy. We're not talking about, theology. The novel is meant to amuse. That doesn't mean that it can't be, moving or even profound. But if it doesn't amuse, then it must be judged a failure. Now, James Bond is a man who is very attractive to women, and he is very good at his job. People have pointed out that this is not how secret agents work. Yes. I think we all know that. And yes, obviously, George Smiley is closer to a real spook, but James Bond has his own appeal. And one of the things that Amos points out about Fleming's Bond, is that he is not a Superman, that he puts in the effort to become good at things or to maintain a certain level, such as, shooting and swimming and things like knife fighting. Let's see. When Bond, to resume, is required to behave like Superman, he has to go into training first. His 2 major Caribbean exploits are preceded by a swimming and running course hardly less taxing than the exploits themselves. His skill with firearms is maintained by constant practice. He takes a special course at the Maidstone Police Range before setting off to defeat Scaramanga's skill. We would think it inappropriate if he weren't the best shot in the service, but are reassured to hear that he isn't as good as the instructor. He's the best gambler and card sharp in the service too, but even this accomplishment is no gift from the gods. Before clobbering Le Chiffre at Baccarat, Bond has a Swedish massage, a nap, and a shower. Before going off to Blade's Club to wipe the floor with Hugo Drax at bridge, Bond settles down in heavy white silk shirt, dark blue trousers of navy serge, etc., his winter relaxing outfit, and spends half an hour working through the drills given in a standard work on cheating. With palming, nullifying the cut, and the very difficult single-handed annulment at his fingertips, he takes 15,000 pounds off Drax naturally and inevitably. Indeed, we hardly notice the switch when he clobbers Drax by a rigged deal and has no need at all of the single-handed annulment and the rest of them. Bond's constant cold showers, apart from reminding us of the ritualistic self-dedicatory element in the secret agent's life, also suggest to us that his abilities are acquired, not innate. If we took that trouble to keep fit, if we started the day with 20 press-ups and enough straight leg lifts to make our stomach muscles scream, then perhaps we could vanquish an octopus and drive off a barracuda should the occasion arise. We couldn't, of course, but we like not having our noses rubbed in the fact. We appreciate the continual hints that what Isaac Newton said of himself could also be said of Bond. His powers are ordinary, only his application brings him success. So you see that in an important way, Ian Fleming's James Bond is an aspirational figure in a way that, well, say Marvel superheroes cannot be. And I suppose it seems to me to speak to a blighted imagination that those movies are so very popular. I suppose it would be wonderful to be able to fly, say, or to be able to, I don't know, crush whole planets with a mighty thunderbolt. But that's not the sort of thing that people wish that they could do. Yes, people do wish that they could be, good at golf or good at bridge or handle their liquor better or be, very good at picking out wines, where they could beat up another man in hand-to-hand combat, that sort of. These are the sorts of things that men actually do wish to do. And James Bond is a wish fulfillment figure. Now, as far as escapism goes, Amos points out that all literature is escapist. There's no way around it. And, even something as highbrow as Hamlet, say. Yes, he writes, all literature is escapist. Everyone at one time or another must have wanted not merely to play, but to be Hamlet. This, I suppose, is the most likely explanation for Hamlet's preeminence in so many people's minds, in defiance of its many claims to be judged the weakest of Shakespeare's tragedies. I agree that, on consideration, Hamlet's the sort of man only a monster of egotism could want to be, but we all have our monstrous moments, and they rarely bring us any permanent harm. I agree, too, that there's very much more in Hamlet that we can get out of it just by identifying with its hero, but nobody, as far as I know, has cut himself off that very much more by identifying now and again, or even a good bit at the time. It reminds me of what P.G. Wodehouse wrote, that Achilles knew what he was about when he sulked in his tent. Sulking in a tent instead of fighting bravely on the battlefield to win back the fair Helen. Well, it's not very recommendable, but we're all given to sulking now and again. Now, I suppose the imprimatur of JFK sold Bond to Americans in a way that, okay, this guy likes it, so it's okay for Americans to read it. Because obviously by the time that the Bond novel started coming out, America had very much replaced Britain as the most powerful country in the world. But that is not the impression that one gets from the James Bond novels. And of course, they're a wish fulfillment in that way. James Bond, as Amos points out, quite likes Americans. However, he doesn't believe they come up to the level of his own people. In other words, James Bond is a patriot. He is not anguished like so many of the characters that you see in the novels by Len Deighton or John le Carré. He is, though, something else. He is he's a Byronic hero. And he writes about this, that the Byronic hero started life about 1818 as Childe Harold in the later cantos of Byron's poems, reappeared in the novels of the Bronte sisters, and was around until fairly recently in such guises as that of Maxime de Winter in Miss Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca. The Byronic hero, Byron's sentimental and humorless idealization of part of himself rather than any kind of real Byron. The Byronic hero is lonely melancholy of fine natural physique, which has become in some way ravaged, of similarly fine but ravaged countenance, dark and brooding in expression of a cold and cynical veneer, above all enigmatic in possession of a sinister secret. Now, one must admit that Bond is hardly the wandering outlaw of his own dark mind, as Byron and his stalking horse were able to afford to be. M's dark mind is the one that counts, and members of the 00 section go where it decides they shall go. And Bond shows nothing of the weary aversion from human life in general, that contemptus mundi which marked his predecessors. Nevertheless, he does function as a latter-day Byron, at once more dilapidated and more soigné. He has never quite got around to the traditional facial antic of curling his lip at all the works of man, but he wouldn't surprise us if he did. Mr. Fleming has brought off the unlikely feat of enclosing this wildly romantic, almost narcissistic, and one would have thought hopelessly out-of-date persona inside the shellac of a secret agent and making it plausible, mentally actable, and to all appearance contemporary. Now, a funny thing happened in the 1960s, that Anglophilia became the rage. That you had the Beatles, and then you had all of the groups that founded them. And I believe it was in, 1965 or 1966, Time magazine, which still meant something in those days, anointed London the swingingest city in the world. There was a hit song by Roger Miller, England swings like a pendulum do, bobbies on bicycles, 2 by 2, Westminster Abbey, the Tower of Big Ben, the rosy red cheeks of the little children. America just fell in love with everything British. And now, there are plenty of Americans that know a lot about Britain, but then there are plenty more that do not. Such that the question of accents, that, oh, you have got one of those accents. Well, there's a lot of regional accents in Britain. You know, the Liverpudlians have their own accents. The Mancunians have their own accents. There's estuary English. You know, there's Yorkshire, home counties, et cetera, et cetera. But they all seem to be one thing. That even today, the Geico Gecko, who, oh, yes, he's got that wonderful British accent. The Geico Gecko speaks like an East End spiv, but this is considered charming by Americans, which I find charming myself, actually. Now, James Bond, I mentioned, is a patriot. It is mentioned throughout the novels that the kind of work that he does is not well remunerated. And in fact, clearly this makes Bond a more approachable figure and a more noble figure. It's all very well to commit daring deeds if one is going to become quite rich because of them, but to do daring deeds simply for the sake of right is another thing entirely. That Amos has something to say about Sean Connery here. With all this shoving out in front, Fleming is able to smuggle in a good deal of semi-aristocraticness by the back door. Following his policy of moderation, he makes M reveal in You Only Live Twice that Bond is an old Etonian, but one who got the push after only two halves, not, of course, for what Simon Raven once described as the usual thing, quite the contrary. M goes on to tell us that after Eton, Bond went to Fettes College. This, one gathers, is an Edinburgh public school of high academic and athletic reputation without the upper-class okayness, which attaches to many comparable English schools, just right for Bond, one feels. Similarly, he could get nowhere near affording to become a member of Blade's Club, but he fits into it without the least incongruity as M's guest, finding it impressive, though in no way novel. When he impersonates Sir Hilary Bray to infiltrate Blofeld's stronghold, Bond has to swat up heraldry as his cover and the real Sir Hilary's personal history, but there is no need for any accent polishing or the like. Incidentally, Sean Connery's total wrongness for the film part of Bond is nowhere better demonstrated than at this point. Mr. Connery could put up a show as a Scottish businessman, all right, but a Scottish baronet, never. That seems fair enough, but on the other hand, Sean Connery's James Bond, right? And the James Bond of the movies is not the James Bond of the books. The cruel and sarcastic humor, which has come to be associated with James Bond, and which was picked up by many others, such as Arnold Schwarzenegger, this is not in the books. I mean, a man who makes cutting remarks after he has, just killed another man, often in a grotesque, disgusting way, people tend to look down at that sort of thing. But Fleming's Bond is not like that. Curiously, Bond detests tea. He thinks that it is soppy. Now, Bond the Patriot. What does this mean to him? His mind drifted into a world of tennis courts and lily ponds, of kings and queens of London, of people being photographed with pigeons on their heads in Trafalgar Square, of the forsythia that would soon be blazing on the bypass roundabouts, of May, the treasured housekeeper in his flat off the King's Road, getting up to brew herself a cup of tea, of the first tube trains beginning to run, shaking the ground beneath his cool, dark bedroom, of the deuce, weather of England, deuce meaning sweet. Amos comments, there are some interesting intrusions here. Just as we think we're settling down to a Rupert Brooke tone poem of nostalgia, with King's Chapel or Henley due any minute, we get this reference to bypass roundabouts. These are hardly left-wing symbols, but to include them in this list would horrify and bewilder older Tories like M, for instance. M would balk at the tube trains, too. He uses them now and then, but only to give his ex-leading stoker driver a rest, and wouldn't be able to understand anyone remembering them sentimentally. The England for which Bond is prepared to die, like the reasons why he's prepared to die for it, is largely taken for granted. This differentiates it to its advantage from the England of most Englishmen of Bond's age group. Negative virtues are even more important in escapist than in enlightening literature, and not the least of blessings enjoyed by Mr. Fleming's reader is his absolute confidence that whatever any given Bond may contain, it will not contain bitter protests or biting satire or even witty commentary about the state of the nation. And I suppose that's one of the reasons why the Bond novels have lasted. We can get all that at home. A few markers, however, can be glimpsed. Politically, Bond's England is substantially right of center. As the title of the 11th volume uninhibitedly proclaims, royalty is at the head of things, an unwantedly emotional passage near the end of Dr. No shows Bond fresh from his ordeal on Crab Key, conferring in the office of the governor of Jamaica and thinking of home. And I remember reading in the National Post, I think it could have been by Anne Kingston, who died recently, a profoundly silly article about James Bond saying that, he would not be able to pick up women at college keggers. that his conversational line wasn't up for that. Well, first of all, what would James Bond be doing at a college kegger? And did people really think that James Bond seduced women with his words? James Bond is very much the strong, silent type, which remains quite popular amongst women, despite what the feminists say in public. Amos explains that James Bond, well, he likes some foreigners better than others, let's put it this way, but he has a good line in bigotry. That is to say, it is really quite specific, the people that he claims to dislike and for what reasons. And thus he compares James Bond to earlier British secret agents. That he says that Hugh and Algy and Peter would have been disgusted to hear Bond a couple of minutes later chatting to the fellow quite easily and almost on equal terms, oblivious of that old sacrosanct division of the working classes into decent, respectful chaps and half-educated, disloyal Jewish Bolshevist scum. All very democratic on Bond's part and all very modern-minded. The England he values is the England of our own time. And I can see, I know that this would count for a lot with Kingsley Amis. Kingsley Amis, you can see this right from the beginning with Lucky Jim, that all of this hankering for the past, the singing of part songs, madrigals, brass rubbing, all that stuff, Amos loathed it. He loved the modern world, at least until he, got old. He didn't seem to like it very much at that point. But, Kingsley Amis thought, these modern inventions, they were a good thing. And Kingsley Amis, you look at the position of Jim Dixon in Lucky Jim, and he just, all of the references to all the money that he's having to put out on beer. He'd prefer not to drink beer, but it's cheaper, and on tobacco. And all of the devices which he has bought in a vain attempt to reduce the amount of money that he spends on tobacco. And Jim Dixon's biggest complaint is that he doesn't earn enough money to smoke as many cigarettes as he would like to, and to drink as much whiskey as he would like. That is to say that his needs are rather modest. If there's one point in these books at which character and author coincide, it's their failure to be tempted into snobbery about people. There's no special attention paid to titled people, or people who have connections of court, or rich people, or people who have great country houses at which they give country house parties, or people who attend such parties, or in general, any of the kinds of people who achieve the gossip columns. Several prominent people are to be met with, such as Sir James Maloney, the famous neurologist, but an obscure neurologist, however deserving, wouldn't be invited to act as advisor to the Secret Service. There are powerful people about too, but Bond's interest in Goldfinger, for instance, is not snobbish. The people who occupy the top places in our society, or who are thought to do so, or who are courted or adored or envied by a lot of other people, the actors, architects, aristocrats, athletes, ballet dancers, bankers, bishops, and so on down through politicians and pop singers to zoologists, never seem to have much of a part in the adventures of 007. The international set, as represented by Count Lip or Count Julio Vincenzo, Tracy's first husband, are treated as bad people. Blofeld's attempt to establish his claim to be a Count Balthasar de Bleuville are regarded as bad and laughable. Most telling of all, M regards his KCMG as an encumbrance. Bond obediently follows suit by turning down an offer of the same at the end of The Man with the Golden Gun. This refers to the Order of St. Michael's and George. And there are three levels in ascending order. I'll just write them down here to remember me. CMG, KCMG, and GCMG. Commander, Knight Commander, and Grand Commander. And that the joke is that the first stands for call me God, the second stands for kindly call me God, and the last, most august, stands for God calls me God. But we see that that James Bond has little interest in this. The Bond novels are criticized, heavily criticized, mocked by others because of their obsession with brand names. Now, Amos explains that one of the reasons that the James Bond novels are so pleasurable to read, so thrilling, is because what he has dubbed the Fleming effect. And he gives an example of this. The motor yacht Disco Volante was a hydrofoil craft built for Largo with Spectre funds by the Italian constructors Leopoldo Rodriguez of Messina, the only firm in the world to have successfully adapted the Schertel-Sachsenberg system to commercial use. With a hull of aluminum and magnesium alloy, the Daimler-Benz four-stroke diesel supercharged by twin Brown-Boveri turbo superchargers, the Disco Volante could move her 100 tons at around 50 knots, with a cruising range at that speed of about 400 miles. She had cost 200,000 pounds. You and I have never heard of Leopoldo Rodriguez, although we admire the touch of giving him a Portuguese name, and we couldn't care less whether the Schertel-Sachsenberg system works the steering or the lavatory flush of the Disco, but we appreciate being told about them. We want our money's worth, the sense of a careful visualizing, researching intelligence behind the writing. You know, it's funny, and this just occurred to me when I was swatting up on this book in the last few days, that I've involved a similar technique to the Schertel-Sachsenberg system, a little joke I invented, that you notice the difference between science fiction and fantasy. Say the difference between the Outer Limits and the Twilight Zone. In the Twilight Zone, weird things happen, okay? There doesn't have to be any kind of explanation. In the Outer Limits, if some weird thing happens, there must be a scientific or pseudoscientific explanation. And so I invented this trope, if you will, which I call the Stuckenschmidt-Poincaré protocols, okay? So someone is saying, he's talking about some amazing advance he's about to achieve, okay? And some other scientist says, no, that's not possible. You must be mad. And the first scientist says, are you familiar with the Stuckenschmidt-Poincaré protocols? And the second scientist slaps his forehead and says, of course, Stuckenschmidt-Poincaré. How could I have forgotten? And yeah, this is, I remember reading the books as a boy and just thinking how thrilling the world seemed to be. You know, I suppose there's something of I had read all the Hardy Boy books, and I suppose James Bond is the next natural step. Garrison Keillor wrote this hilarious short story, which was, expressed how I felt when I was a young boy. How come my father isn't taking me around the world for adventures? Every time I see him, he's on the couch eating potato chips and watching the ball game. But, with James Bond, you get to travel the world and meet interesting people. And I was carried away by the Fleming effect, by the detail. It's like, wow, you read this book and you learn how to unlock locked cabinets. And you can tell, here is some spycraft here, to tell whether someone has been messing about in your room, looking for something, all that sort of thing, But of course, I suppose you also learn how to seduce women. Again, it's not the talking that's important. Although, if the woman that you're interested in has just dropped a substantial sum at the baccarat table and she doesn't have the funds, I suppose it helps if you take care of the debt for her. So Amos writes, the imaginative use of information and so on is rather a mouthful, so it's highly characteristic of these books, so much their essence, that I don't see why it shouldn't be called the Fleming effect. Thunderball is full of it. The biographies of Blofeld and Largo, as well as Patacci, not long, but bristling with factual detail, the headquarters of Spectre and the precise workings of FERCO, Spectre's front organization, the plan for the reception of the ransom, and its disposal, the U.S. Navy's atomic submarine, the Manta, even the treasure grounds of the southern Bahamas. The Disco Volante is only pretending to be looking for Spanish galleons. And I just know, I just love all this stuff, you know? Every so often, the Fleming effect takes on the added note of conviction, with the author not only caught up in the enjoyment of facts and of the counterfeiting of facts, but deeply absorbed, writing with an energy that shows he's dealing with something personally important to him. The most unmistakable of these interests is underwater swimming, which appears in 5 of the 13 books, and each time sends the emotional temperature soaring. Even Mr. Fleming's detractors have conceded that he handles the subject adequately. Gambling figures importantly in 4 of the books and as marginal decoration in 2 more. Of these 2, one of these 2 is Thunderball. Now, Amos points out that there's a lot of bridge and golfing in the James Bond books, and that Amos does not care at all for bridge or golfing. Well, you know, I like to golf. Well, pitch and putt golf anyway, and I used to play bridge and enjoyed it. Again, of gambling, I have no interest whatsoever, but I mentioned the Archer's film, The Red Shoes, that to me, it is a testament to the success of a work that it can enthrall people when you don't like the subject. And this is one of the virtues of the James Bond books. I mean, when an author is in love with his subject, you know, whether it be gambling or swimming or whatever, well, you know, that plays. And I'm going to leave off here with one particular example of the Fleming effect. The player's packet is not much of an intrusion. It occupies only 4 or 5 pages in a longish book. It provides one of those points of rest which every action story needs. Its pleasantly fanciful manner makes a good contrast with what comes before Bond's chemin de fer duel with Largo, and after Bond's duel below the Disco Volante with Spectre's underwater sentry. And it confirms our view of Domino as a gentle and naive person inside the hard shell. But some instances of the Fleming effect in later books take rather more justifying. He goes on at great length about the old player packets, the old, exceedingly elaborate, that was before it was replaced with what they call in the design industry classy but classless, a style that I despise. But you know, when a writer loves his subject, when he loves his material and he has the talent, it can't help but pay great dividends. And so I greatly enjoy the James Bond dossier by Kingsley Amis. And, you know, if you want to learn more about James Bond, obviously read the books first, but it is a very entertaining read. And frankly, I could, you know, read Kingsley Amis about anything because he was just that intelligent and just that good of a writer. So let's see. One last look at the chat. Jim Device says, thing you've got to remember about Britain, and sorry, it's an old one, but the class system is not like the States. Yeah. The funny thing is, as Christopher Booker pointed out in his book, The Neophiliacs, since the Second World War, the class system has been rather turned on its head with this worship of proletarians or would-be proletarians. I mean, Mick Jagger is an early example of this. Mick Jagger came from quite a middle-class family and had quite a respectable education, but I suppose he was the first Mockney. And Jamie Oliver, again, I believe Jamie Oliver grew up in Reading and in middle-class circumstances, but, yo, Jamie Oliver talks like this, food's got to be quick, it's got to be tasty, because, you know, you wouldn't want to have a posh accent anymore. No, no, no. Let's see what else we got here. Christopher Lee was great in Golden Gun. Yeah. It's just, this isn't from the book, it's from Goldfinger, but it just, I think this is my last comment of the show. That there's a scene in Goldfinger where the titular villain has brought all these mafia toughs to his place, and he has a plan for them. He wants them to take part in it, and he pushes this button, and this enormous model of what he's planning to do comes up out of the floor, and it is just in spectacular detail. And I remember seeing that as a kid and thinking, wow, is this what rich people can do? And then, of course, years later, I thought, how would you ever get something like that? You look through the yellow pages or go on the internet. Oh, there it is, evil millwrights. Hello, evil millwrights? Yeah, I got a big job for you, etc., etc. Okay. Dawn from Beyond says, today in Central Florida, sunny and 90 degrees. Yeah, good luck keeping folks off the beach. I thought they were ordered off of Miami Beach a couple of days ago. I'm going to wrap it up here. I want to thank you all for listening or watching or both. I will be back on the air Monday afternoon at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. If you want to contribute to the show, my PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. I wish you all a happy and healthy weekend, and I hope that you can all find a way to avoid loneliness amidst the panic. Good night.